Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. This video that I'm about to present to you has been probably about 5 months in the making. I started the bags back in May, I think, and it took me over a month to make them, and then I had started editing the footage and I had lost all of the audio. 14 hours worth, and then I had to go through all of that footage to try and do a voiceover for it. So it nearly didn't come. Let's have a look at the bag. Ages ago, I showed you how to make this bag. It's a handbag made with sample swatch fabrics, and there was a whole book of these samples, and I'm going to show you what they looked like when we started. So when we started, it was a sample book like this, and it had great big pieces of fabric inside there, but the colours were much more vibrant than what you see here. But they were the same concept. So all of the fabric in these bags that we're going to be making today is from one of these books, and we've got, I think they're, what's that mother's flower? The chrysanthemums. These are banana leaves. Then we have got bird of paradise as well, with some pineapples on the back. So we've got lots of different vibrant colours. I'm going to show you my process for batch sewing every one of these bags. I absolutely love assembly lines. I don't know why, it's probably just OCD. I like things really organised when I'm working, but up here everything is just totally scattered. Anyway, I'll talk to you about how long well, we already know. It's taken me 14 hours to do this, but we'll talk about how long it's taken and the materials and how I'm going to price them out anyway. So come along and I'll show you how I batch sew 10 of these really nice, bright handbags. So I'll be doing a time trial for this. I need to know exactly how long it's going to take me to make each of these bags. That way it'll be much easier for me to put a price on my bags. So I have my clips, my fabric. I've pre-wound a whole heap of bobbins. I have the strapping that I'm going to be using for my handles, scissors, new blade in my cutter, marking pen, seam gauge, a curve template, a heap of magnetic closures. I have double-sided tape. This is a wash-away double-sided tape, so you can use it for stitching through and it doesn't gum up your needles. I do have some more double-sided tape. This one is a craft tape. It's rubbish. It's not good for stitching through and it will wreak havoc with your sewing machine. But I will be using this in places that don't get stitched over. I'm just trying to use it all up. So I've got my double-sided tape. I've got two different types of labels. These are my business labels that tell you the details of my website and where the bags come from. They go on the inside of the bag. And then my char labels, I have two different types. They will be going on the front of the bag. I have a heap of vinyl here, so I'm going to use what I can from this lot. Hopefully that's enough. And I have a heap of Parlan, which is a stabiliser that I like to use for the back of the sample fabrics. And I have a heap of different coloured fabric pieces that I'm going to be using for the linings and also the pockets. And I think, and I also have my to-do list. So I've made notes here of the order that I'm going to be doing everything in. So cutting the samples, cut the vinyl, stabilisers, webbing. I like to have a list of everything that I've got to do to make all of these bags, and then I'll allocate times because I will put the clock on and time every single section that I'm going to be doing. I have 20 pieces of fabric here, so that's going to give me 10 bags. And as I said, hopefully I will have enough vinyl pieces to be able to make all 10. Let's get started. I'm going to start by cutting all the paper edges off these sample swatches. I've tried keeping it in a previous project and it didn't work too well. So I will be cutting off all of that glued paper. It's a much more time effective way of processing these fabric pieces than running them through the wash and then having to peel all the paper off. The top of the fabric has staple holes in it and I'll be trimming that section off as well. Once I've cut all of those pieces, then I'll know what size my vinyl is going to be. I'm starting this project at 25 to 1 and it's almost lunchtime. I've got lunch under control and I've also got dinner cooked for tonight as well. So I'm hoping I can just get on with this and get these bags made today. I do need to try and fit in a nap as well. Let's get started. The first couple of fabric pieces are a little bit smaller than the rest, so I'll just cut those and get them out of the way. I've decided to do 2 at a time because I need 2 pieces for each bag. That'll make it a lot quicker for me as well. You'll notice that I'm not measuring any of these fabric pieces either. All I'm doing is squaring them up. Each pair of fabric pieces are going to be going together in the same bag and the vinyl will be cut to the size of the width of the fabric pieces. Right now, all I'm trying to do is get the best use of the fabric. I've got the heat press on and now I'm going to set up this little assembly line with my fabric, the heat press and the Parlan that I like to use for my stabiliser. So what I'm doing is laying my fabric pieces over the top of the stabiliser. I'll cut the stabiliser to size. And after I've done that, there's a little sticker on the back of the fabric. It's very, very tacky and I'm intentionally taking this off last because otherwise it'll just make my rotary cutter really tacky. My ruler will get tacky and I'll get sticky fingers and all sorts of things. So it's much easier to take that off whilst I'm cutting up all of these pieces of stabiliser. All the time while I'm doing that, I'll have one piece of fabric in the heat press with the Parlan on the back of it and I'll rotate that around. I think I have about 20 to 30 seconds per press, and if it doesn't fit under the machine then I'll just rotate it as it needs to be done. But whilst I'm waiting for the heat press, I'm also cutting up and removing those labels from all of the other fabric pieces and just getting everything ready as I go. I usually buy my Parlan in 50 or 100 metre rolls at a time. That way I've got plenty to sell to customers and I have a huge stash for myself. Quite often I'll actually cut off about 4 or 5 metres. I'll fold it up onto a card and that way it's much easier to use rather than having to unroll it all the time. When I finished with the heat press, I've got to decide which labels I want to put on my bags. I've got my new char labels and some of them have got a light faux leather look and others have a darker look. And I just want to make sure I use the right colour with the background that I've got. And this is where I use the double-sided tape that I don't like to sew with. I run a small strip of double-sided tape on the back of the label because it's got really good tackiness, so it sticks really well to the fabric. And I can just position it on the fabric where I want it. When I take it to the machine, I can sew around the outside edges so my needle's never touching or coming into contact with that double-sided tape. It's a great way to get rid of the tape that you purchased incorrectly or just don't want to have. And then it's time to sew all the labels on. I used to go to the trouble of sewing all 4 sides of my labels and then I thought, well, really, what's the point? So now all I do is sew the top and the bottom edges, which are the longest sides. It saves so much time because you don't have to stop at the corner, pivot and then come down, stop at the corner and pivot again. You just go straight along the top and the bottom. Now that I've sewn all those labels on, I'll trim off all of those loose threads. Sometimes I'm really neat and I'll trim my threads off as I go. Other times I just do everything at the end. But this is as good a time as any. I have lots of vinyl offcuts and most of them that I've got left over now are red and brown. I'm going to see what I can get out of all of these. I'm not really sure what width I'm going to have for or the height I'm going to have for the vinyl. I'll just see whatever I can get out of the pieces, and hopefully there's enough width across the fabric to be able to cover it all. But I'm measuring them up on each bag, and then I'll just attach those to the bottom of the bag. So at the bottom of the bag I'll run a strip of double-sided tape. It's much easier to use that, and this time around I'm using the one that you can sew over. And the way to tell the difference between the two is the one that you can sew over is usually a water-soluble tape. So if you wet it, it'll go tacky and dissolve in your hands, whereas the other one doesn't. It's actually really adhesive, but you can't stitch over it, whereas this one's water-soluble and it's really kind on your needles. Because I've got just the two colours of vinyl, I'm just sort of auditioning each piece of fabric with the vinyl to see which one is suited best. So the red might look better with that bird of paradise, the bright features in that, and the browns with others, but I'll chop and change and see how they look. I actually really enjoy this process, not knowing how everything's going to come together, and then just cutting up all these random bits of fabric to see which ones do look better. Most of my bags are often quite random, even though they're the same sizing. There's quite often a lot of discrepancy between them, and I just try and make do with what I've got. Once I've put all of the vinyl onto my fabric, I'll take it over to the machine, and I've also put my Teflon foot on. So when you're working with vinyl, you want to use something that's good for leather or vinyl, usually a Teflon foot or some kind of a plastic foot that will help glide the fabric much easier. Otherwise you're not going to have an even feed of your fabric or your vinyl. So rather than sewing each bag and then top stitching them, it's much more time effective if you sew the vinyl to all of the bag pieces at once, and once you've done all of those, then you can increase your stitch length for your top stitching, and then you can top stitch all of the pieces. I usually use the same colour thread for most of my bags. In this instance, because I'm using red vinyl and brown vinyl, I'll use a red thread for the top stitching and a brown thread for the brown on the brown bags. But as far as piecing, I'll use anything that I've got. When I'm working with sample fabrics like this, I rarely cut up my lining fabrics at the same time because there are so many variations in the finished size of the fabric. So I usually wait until this point here. I know what size the front and back of my pieces are, and because I kept two pieces together earlier, I'm cutting two pieces of the lining to the same size as the two pieces for the back and front of the bag. I usually just grab a whole bunch of fabric and cut out all of that fabric until I've run out, and then I'll grab some other fabric that I can use with it. Big jobs like this, I do tend to go through more than one rotary cutter blade sometimes. I found that using cheap blades really serves no purpose at all. I might get, 1 or 2 days use out of the fabric or out of the blade, and then it starts chewing up my fabric. I have learnt the hard way that it's much better to buy good quality blades, and for that reason I usually pay good money for the Clover brand. I use a 65mm blade, which is bigger than the normal one, because it just makes it easier, because it's quicker to cut. I do have an electric cutter, but I keep forgetting to use it. These burgundy pieces are for the pockets for the inside of the bag, and then I will cut up the stabilisers to go on 1/2 of that pocket as well. On the outside of my bag, I'm also going to have a flap that folds over from the back to the front. So I'll be using this burgundy fabric as well for the lining of those pocket flaps. They'll also need a little bit of stabiliser on them as well. And then I'm going to have to go through the bags and see how many brown and red pieces I need for those flaps as well, because I want a vinyl flap on the other side. So I'll need to cut those to size as well. I've just been using a cotton iron-on interfacing for these lining pieces. I'm going to fuse that onto the back of the lining fabric rather than the vinyl because I'm afraid that I'll melt the vinyl. I've been too scared to test it. But I'm using a magnetic closure on these bags, and one of those pieces is actually going onto the lining side. So I need to stabilise that so the magnet doesn't tear through. I can lay out a whole bunch of those pieces on the heat press, and that way the job will go a lot quicker. And once I've done all of that, I can measure and mark all of the positions for the magnetic closures onto those lining pieces. And then I can attach all of those little magnetic closures. So I've got to make sure that I use all of the same side pieces for this section of the flap, because if I get any of these mixed up now, then I could possibly get the wrong sides onto the other part of the bag, and that would be a catastrophe. So I make sure that I use either all of the male or all of the female sides on the flap, and then I'm not going to get into any trouble later on. They're a little bit time consuming and hard on the thumbs, but you get there in the end. With the snaps on and the fabric all stabilised, it's time to mark the curves for the flaps. So I'm just marking a curve on two sides of the vinyl pieces, and after that I'll clip the lining and the vinyl pieces together, ready to sew them up. You'll notice I haven't cut the curves off. It's actually a lot quicker just to leave those curves on there and use that marked line as a guide for stitching. So I'll just stitch around the curves for each of those pieces, and we can cut them off later. And now is when I can trim all the excess vinyl pieces off the edge and trim close to the curves on all of those pieces as well. Next, I've turned everything the right way out. I've got to poke out all those curved edges, make them sit really nice. Because the vinyl is so stiff and it's working against the stabiliser and the fabric, I've put loads of clips around the edges to try and help keep it nice and flat. It's been about a week since I've gone from clipping all of these pieces together to sew up those vinyl flaps. And you can probably see these little poke marks in the vinyl. I shouldn't have left the clips on there for that amount of time, but it did come good, and you can't see any evidence of the little bruising that was there. So all I'm doing now is top stitching around the edge of each. I'll match the colour, I'll match the thread colour for the reds and for the browns. These big burgundy pieces now are the pocket pieces for the inside of the bag. I'm putting stabiliser on half of the piece and then just folding that over. I will still need to take all of these over to the heat press and fuse that stabiliser to that one side of the pockets. I've also cut extra stabiliser pieces, which is the same size as the pocket, and I'm actually going to put that to the back of the one piece of the lining. I feel that the lining is a little bit lightweight, and if I sew the pocket on directly without any stabiliser on the fabric, then it's just going to tear through. Rather than having to put something on the whole piece, I might as well just put a piece of stabiliser to the back of that lining, and then the pocket can sit directly over the top of it. I'm just measuring and marking the positions for all of those pocket pieces, and you might notice that I'm also keeping all of my outer fabric together with these lining pieces as well. So I make sure at all stages that I'm keeping my lining pieces together and my back and front pieces together, because I've got everything cut to those sizes. So what I'm doing here at the heat press is I'm ironing the pocket pieces, and then I'm also ironing the stabiliser onto the back of the lining, and each of those two lining pieces will go off with the pocket piece back onto the outer fabric, and they'll stay there until I'm ready to actually sew them together and do the next step. Whilst I'm waiting for each of these pieces to go through their cycle on the heat press, I'm actually at the other table just making sure I've got everything in the right order. And I've got the stabiliser onto one side of each of the pocket pieces. Before I sew them onto the fabric, I'm going to attach my business label just onto the what will be the outside of the pocket. I'm also using a Sewline glue pen just to run a little bit of glue on the back of the labels. Then that way I can put it in position, and I don't have to worry about wasting my time trying to find or locate the right spot for my labels when I take them to the machine to sew them on. Next, I'm stitching the labels onto one side of the pocket. After I've done that, I'll bring the right sides together of the burgundy fabric, and then I'm going to sew all around the pockets. And I'm leaving an opening on one side so that I can turn them all through shortly. Then I'm trimming the corners, and I'll turn all of those pockets through and poke all the corners out. Then it's back to the heat press to press those pockets in place just so that they look nice and crisp, and have them prepared for top stitching. I've also got to fold all of those little openings closed as well. It'll make it easier to stitch everything down when I put them onto the linings. Now I'm doing the top stitching for all of the pocket pieces. There's no need to close up the openings at this stage because that'll be done when I put the pockets onto the linings. It seems like it's taken ages just to get to this part, and all I'm doing now is putting pockets onto the lining fabric. Doing a lot of bags like this that have got a lot of elements to it do tend to be very time consuming. So I am just positioning the pocket pieces onto one of the lining pieces, and I have a tendency to get stabbed by my pins all the time, and rather than leaving blood stains all over my bags, I'm using the glue pen again just to run a strip of glue to hold the sides of the pocket in place. The Soline glue pens are really good. They dry up pretty quickly and you can stitch straight over the top of them. You can peel your fabric away as well if you find it's not in the right position. They're really good for English paper piecing. And now it's time to go back to the machine and stitch all of those pockets in place. As I'm stitching around the outside edges, that's also closing up that opening I've left at the bottom. And on each of the pockets, I'm also going to create another channel. So I'll just stitch another row about 1 inch away from the first stitching line, just to create a channel to put 1 or 2 pens in, or even hang your glasses from there. And all the while I'm still actually keeping my outer fabric and my lining fabric pieces together. And this is where it finally feels like the bag's actually going to start coming together. Now I'm attaching one of the lining pieces to what will be the front of my bag, and the lining piece that's got the pocket on it, that will end up on what will be the back of my bag. I'm also marking the centre for the outer fabric on the back, because that's where I've got to place the flap. So the flap goes down first, then the lining piece that has the pocket in it. And you can probably see on the back of the lining the stabiliser that I've got stitched in place. So that was ironed in place back when we were at the heat press, but it was actually sewn in as well when I stitched the pocket onto the fabric from the other side. So you can see by doing that, it gives the pocket a lot more stability on the fabric, and it's less likely to tear and put holes in it. So now whilst I'm at the machine, I'm sewing along the top edge of the bag. So I'm doing the front and the bag pieces. And from now, at least until I finish this slot, there's now only going to be the front section and the back section. And I don't have to worry about trying to keep so many pieces together. So what I'm doing now is I'm clipping the front of the bag and the back of the bag together. And I think I'm just doing this for the first one. I need to get a measurement or a position for the magnetic closure that needs to go on the main body of the bag. So we've already done it on the flap. So what I need to do is clip those edges together and then push the flap down and make an indent in the front of the fabric. And then after I've done that, I can measure from the top the position that I need to put the magnetic closure in for all of my bags. So with all of the other bags, all I need to do is find the centre and then measure that same distance down from the top. I'm not going through and giving you instructions or dimensions for this bag, but I will put the link in the description and I'll put it in the pinned comments as well. So if you want to know how to make this bag the same way that I'm making this, I do have an instructional video just for one bag, not for 10 or 11 of them. So once I've marked the position for the magnetic closures, I've got to cut all of the little openings, and then I've got to put the other side of that magnetic closure into all of the front pieces of the bags. Now the handles are something I probably should have done a lot earlier on in the process, but I have to admit I nearly forgot to put them on at all. I like to use webbing. I usually buy hundreds of meters at a time, and I actually sell this stuff. So these days I usually buy enough for customers as well. But I use a black polypropylene webbing. It's a really good quality webbing, and I find this is just a lot easier to use on all of the bags that I make. I use this for handles, for tabs, just for little wristlet straps, you name it, I'll use it. So I'm cutting a whole heap of strips to size. I'm keeping each pair separate because I'm making sure that at least 2 at a time are the same length. That way there's less chance of a discrepancy when I put the bag handles together. And then it's time to measure and mark the positions for the handles. And what I do is put the raw edge facing down. So in this particular bag, I'm going to be using some little vinyl covers on the front of the handles. So it doesn't matter that the raw edges of the webbing are showing. So I'm just marking the positions for everything. And I use a little bit of double-sided tape to hold the handles in place as well. So the double-sided tape that I use for the handles is the one that you can't sew through. It's actually got a better grip for the fabric. But I do make sure I put it in a position that I'm not actually stitching over, although you can't always avoid that. And after that, I've got to sew all the handles in place. So I'll usually sew a box or a rectangle around each handle, and yeah, that's about it. Pretty easy, really. So I feel like I'm finally getting somewhere now that the handles are put on, the pockets are done, the lining's done, and the flap as well. But in reality, I think there's still about 3 or 4 hours to go before I finished. So I said earlier that I'm covering the end of the handles with some tabs, or I don't even know what they're called. But I'm making these little tabs out of the leftover bits of vinyl that I've got. Of course, I'm going to put the red on the red bags and the brown on the ones with the brown base. And I started cutting out all of the shapes individually, and it was taking me ages. And then it dawned on me that I have a cutting machine, you know, like the Cricut. And so once I figured out how to draw the shape, I ended up cutting them all out using that machine. Still learning how to use it, so I didn't do a perfect job, but at least it worked for these bags. Coco was intrigued as well. She had to have a good sticky beak and see how this machine worked. She probably wanted to know if it was edible. So I finally got all of those little tabs cut out and made sure I've got enough for each of the bags, because each bag needs 4 of them. And then all I'm doing is using some double-sided tape to stick them into position, because it's too hard to put pins or clips. You don't want to put pins through vinyl, so the double-sided tape is the best thing for it. And then over at the machine, I'm stitching all of those tabs in place. So with all of these little patches, I think from memory in the original video, I actually sewed all the way around them, and then I did a cross in the middle as well. I decided not to do that. I didn't think it looked very nice, and it certainly didn't need it, because they're not a supportive piece, they're just a decorative piece. So 1 or 2 of my bags might have crosses on them, and then the rest of them just have the square around it. It does take a really long time though, because you've just got to go so slow every time you get to a corner and turn. But we do get there eventually. Then I've got to trim off all the loose threads. I might as well do that now, because I'm sure I'll miss them if I leave them to the end. And this is where my back and front bag pieces finally come together. So I'll lay out the lining and the outer fabric, I'll separate the two, and then I'll place one side faced up, then I'll grab the opposing side and have that faced down, clip down all of the sides. When I clip the edges together, what I'm doing is making sure that the lining pieces are attached at that end and the outer fabric pieces are attached as well. And I'm lining up the top edges of what will be the top of the bag and then putting the clips in place on the sides. When I take this to the machine, I'm going to sew the side edges all around the bag, and I'm also going to sew the top and bottom edges. But on the lining, I do need to leave a large opening on one side. Now, I cannot for the life of me find the footage where I've sewn all of these pieces, so you're just going to have to imagine that that's been done. It's just a matter of sewing straight down those sides and the bottom. I'm not making a very big box on the bottom of these bags. I think I'm only cutting out about 1 inch, which will give me about 2 inches at the base of each of the bags. And to save time, I'm only marking one side of the bottom of the vinyl pieces. Then I'm flipping the lining fabric over to the back of it and clipping those together just to hold it in place. And I'll cut all of those corners out at the same time. It's so much quicker than having to measure and cut all the corners. And because I'm using vinyl, it's actually easier to mark all the box corners here and cut them out. If I go straight to the machine and fold everything as I go, it's actually a lot harder to keep those side seams and the bottom seam nicely lined up. So it's, yeah, I'll get a better finish if I do it this way. Once they're all cut out, I'll actually clip those corners together, and I'll bring the lining fabric to the base of the outer fabric as well, and I'll make sure I clip all of those corners together on both sides. I do sometimes opt for just folding the corners out and sewing up the corners over at the machine, but because this is vinyl, it's harder to work with. So for the box corners, I'm just pinching the edges together, and I'm actually sewing the lining and the vinyl corners together at the same time. This way the lining of the bag is going to stay in place and it's never going to want to come out when you're putting things in and out of your bag. It also means you don't have to do 2 lots of box corners. And then it's time for turning all the bags through. So this is really exciting because I know that I'm just about finished now. Once I've turned everything through, it's just a matter of sewing up the side seam. Actually, that's not all I have to do. I'm sewing up the side seams of all of these bags now, and then all that's left after that is the top stitching. So I've still got 10 bags to go, so that'll take a little bit of time. So when I top stitch, I like to top stitch with my outer fabric to the inside of the bag, so I have my bags inside out. That way I can actually see the fabric, or the nicer fabric, facing up, and I can see all the stitches there and make sure everything looks really good. It's easier to line up those edges at the top too. And then I'm completely finished. Can't wait to see them all. That was a marathon effort, wasn't it? Here are all of the bags that I finished. All 10 of them. Well, there's only 9 left. The one I've made originally was at the shop, and when I made these, because I did finish them 4 months ago, I sold 2 all up. So this one, I think that's a chrysanthemum, pineapple on the back. Better show you quickly how these have turned out. Another chrysanthemum, monkey, bird of paradise with pineapple, bananas, and the flowers again. So it's pretty much the same kind of theme all the way through: bananas, pineapples, monkeys, bird of paradise. And then we have these ones here. I think this one was my favourite, the one with the bird of paradise on the front and then that really pretty aqua in the background. Anyway, that's all of my bags completely finished. It took me 14 hours in total to make all of them. And the material costs in this bag were less than $5. So my costs were tags. I usually buy thousands of these at a time. The magnetic closure, I buy everything in bulk. The webbing for the handles, the Parlan that's on the inside as my stabiliser, and then my labels that are on the inside and outside of the bag. So the material cost itself is probably about $5 or less for each bag. And I want to price these. Usually I'll have a figure in my mind of what price I want to sell something at. And I think about $75 to $80 for each of these bags. So I work out how much the cost of material is, which was about $5 a bag. And say I had the bag at $75. So that would bring the material value down to, or the time value down to $70 in labour. So it took me 14 hours, that is 840 minutes. That means it takes me 84 minutes to make each one of these bags. I don't usually make bags that take this much time. You know, little things like the flaps and preparing the pockets on the lining as well. Those sorts of things took a lot of extra time, and even the tabs over the front of the handles took a lot of extra time. So 84 minutes for a bag, I guess, is pretty good. But when you do something in big quantities like that, your time is going to be a lot quicker as well, because you have these processes happening. So it works out that at 84 minutes for $70, works out roughly about $50 an hour for labour. I'm pretty happy with that. That will cover my Australian labour rate. It will cover insurance, taxes, machine maintenance, threads, double-sided tape, you know, electricity, all of those hidden costs that nobody thinks about. I have added all of that in, and as long as I get a minimum of $45 an hour for my products, anything above that is pretty good. So I hope I've covered everything. What did you think of the format? As I said, I had lost all the audio for this video, and I had to go and re-edit everything, and it's just taken me months to get my head around it. I've had to compact all of the data as well so that I could fit that into what I had to say, because I guarantee you do not want to listen to or watch 14 hours of video. That would drive me insane. So did you like the format? Let me know what you think. Anyway, I am going to have a well-earned rest. Oh, how did you like the transition from that shiny bald head to all this hair I've got now? So I do apologise. I had actually filmed a different introduction 5 months ago. So back then I had no hair. I was going through chemo and everything, and I was able to show you the samples before I even started. But I didn't want to go into this video, given that we're so many months later. I didn't want to go into this video with my head as bald as a badger when you have all seen me with all this hair recently. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how much it's grown in such a short time. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.